to singing lessons. We'll start with the pros. Sound, direction, guidance, and accountability. A teacher is a trained individual able to instruct and guide you as a singer. They can ensure that you develop wholly as a singer, as well as keeping you accountable when it comes to practicing. Furthermore, their level of accountability extends to giving you realistic expectations of what you can or can't do. In my experiences, I found that self-taught singers are rather ambitious, often choosing very difficult repertoire that their voice can't handle. For example, as a teen, I would try and teach myself by learning challenging songs, and I always picked challenging songs from the likes of Mariah Carey, Celine Dion, and looking back, it was rather cringe, because I actually didn't manage those songs. Going for lessons later on in life made me realize just how my ambition had set me up for failure really. Suitable repertoire for your development. A good singing teacher understands the importance of choosing appropriate repertoire, as this will enable the student's voice to come out. Based on the FUEGO system, which is basically a classical system of classifying the voice according to texture, picking repertoire that aligns to your classification ensures that the true vocal quality of the voice comes out. Some examples from my experiences of working with self-taught singers made me realize how many would teach themselves repertoire that sort of wasn't within their vocal type. So it would basically be like a soprano trying to pick contralto repertoire. Contralto is the lowest female vocal type. Or it could be an individual whose voice doesn't run. In classical singing, we call it coloratura. And you would find that somebody with very little agility trying to pick songs that have the most incredibly fast runs. And then as they began lessons with me, as I began to pick repertoire that I identified according to what I could hear in terms of their texture, it became easier, and they started to realize the fullness of their voice. So, what am I saying? A good teacher will help you identify the kind of voice that you have, and they will pick the correct repertoire around that. Now, I'm not saying that you can't stretch yourself and try and pick repertoire that's outside of your vocal type, but as the saying goes, why not play to your strengths? Measured progress and consistent development. Having a teacher is probably the most efficient way to accomplish your goals as a singer, from extending your range, increasing repertoire, or just advancing your technique. The more regularly you attend lessons and practice, the more likely you are to see results and consistency. Self-learning requires a huge amount of discipline, as well as knowing what you're doing. An expert will ensure you get results. While it might take you a while to see these results, they will come in time. Correct technique. Unlike other instruments, the voice is a tricky instrument, as you're not able to observe what's happening when you're singing. So if you're engaging in risky singing, you may not be able to pick up on it until you develop a serious vocal fault or injury. The risk of injury is lessened when you take lessons with an experienced singing teacher who is able to guide your development in a safe manner. By the same token, I've come across many individuals who incurred serious vocal injuries at the hands of professional singing teachers. So, it is critical to choose a teacher that will ensure they are teaching you safe practices as well as correct technique. You have your own hype person and open doors. Okay, so this is kind of just my own opinion. But in my experience, I find that our music teachers become our hype person, especially if you've been with them for a lengthy period of time. What do I mean by that? They are there encouraging you through the difficult times, promoting you to get more opportunities to perform or grow, or just pushing you to do more because they believe in your abilities and potential. I remember before I had a teacher, it was incredibly difficult believing in myself as I had no real support for musical development. But once I started lessons, I felt more secure in having a teacher who acknowledged my work and affirmed me in everything that I did with regards to my singing, thereby gaining more confidence in my abilities. I believe the bond you develop with your teacher is really an extraordinary one that carries you through and motivates you. Just a disclaimer though, this obviously applies to the teachers that you stick with, not the ones you disliked and ran away from. Now on to the cons. The teacher has absolute control. Now this is a complicated one for sure. A teacher has the power to determine the course in which their student goes. This can be a good and a bad thing. It is good if the teacher is aligned to what the student wants, but the bad can manifest in a variety of ways. Let me give an example. The modern singer faces the uphill task of being versatile because the industry demands it. So, if you're going to a teacher who strictly specializes in one style and you want to be more flexible, this means you're subjected to one particular style with possibly no hope of versatility. Another example is a teacher who is not open-minded enough. Personally, when I started teaching, I had a grand idea to teach singers my way, to be classically based, no pop or rock till they were ready. I even had an avoid list of artists, which I'm not going to mention. And almost a decade later, I had to learn to be less absolutist and dictatorial and embrace other styles, provided the student was obviously going forward with their development. The environment called for it, and I ended up realizing that if I didn't change, I would lose a lot of my students. In the end, I developed much better relationships with the students as I became more flexible. So what am I saying? Choose the teacher that best suits you. Obviously, the number one consideration is the teacher must give you the correct technical foundations, but then choose the teacher that will teach you in the styles that you like. So there's no point in going to a purely classical teacher when you want to learn jazz. Compatibility. This is probably the story of most music teachers' lives. Since lessons involve interaction and developing a rapport, a certain level of compatibility is required to sustain this. If you do not get on well with a student, the lessons may often seem unbearable, resulting in diminished results, superseded by quitting. I'm not saying that your teacher has to be your bestie, but there needs to be a certain level of respect from one another. That comes with compatibility. And that level of compatibility ensures that you develop a bond of trust with your student so they trust your decisions, especially where repertoire is concerned, where choosing exam pieces or entering certain competitions. That all comes when you develop a really solid rapport with your student and they trust you to make the right decision. Repertoire. Now, I'm not going to delve into this one as I've gone through it in the previous episode. Some teachers may compel their students to sing certain songs, pieces, technical exercises even, that they may not like or identify with, even if it's for developmental purposes. And this creates a level of difficulty for the students, especially if they view it as not being beneficial or valuable. So, what I'm trying to say here is having a singing teacher does not always mean you will get to sing whatever you want. However, the bigger picture is, if your teacher is into developing certain parts of your voice that need work, then they will pick repertoire that will play to that. And the repertoire that they pick to develop certain parts of your voice will result in your voice becoming better. And then you can sing all the things that you like. Expensive. Now, this one is a very personal one for me. While music lessons in certain parts of the West are cheaper due to being subsidized by the government, it remains largely expensive, especially in developing countries, most especially in Africa, where I'm from. In Africa, music lessons are considered a luxury and mostly accessible to students in private schooling. In addition, the cost of lessons also impacts the number of lessons a student can attend. This means that it is difficult to keep up consistent lessons if you do not have adequate financial resources. Let's not forget that there are extra costs when it comes to having private lessons, like registration for exams, competitions, Eisteddfods, paying your accompanist, buying backing tracks. If you want to go the full Monty, you are required to cover those extra costs, and for some of us, it was just not attainable. And even up till now, for some students, they cannot manage. In my experiences, many people in Africa are self-taught as they just cannot afford private lessons on a So ultimately, I've found in my experiences as a teacher that the students who are obviously financially well off are the ones who are able to afford lessons, and the ones who can even add to their lessons in terms of having extra lessons, doing extra music theory, extra oral classes, as well as entering competitions and exams. They seem to benefit from the fullness of singing lessons, whilst those who cannot afford it will only sort of experience one side of it through self-learning on platforms like YouTube, for example. So the expense is always something that really can be limiting for singers that really want to take their development further. Now, before we conclude this episode, let's take a quick look at some examples of famous singers who've engaged in self-learning versus those that trained with a teacher. Now, I found it rather difficult to identify the self-taught musicians. Many of them were listed as self-taught musicians who both sang and played another instrument, with mention being made of how they taught themselves how to play the other instrument, like a guitar or piano, but there was nothing definitive about how they taught themselves how to sing. But I suspect this is purely because singing is something that we all naturally can do, and many of us sort of grew up singing at every turn, whether it was at school, at home, in church, you name it. So I suspect that many musicians, like many individuals, probably started self-taught in the sense that they learned to sing on their own. And then later on in life, when the opportunity presented itself, then that's when they started to engage in lessons with professionals. Let's quickly take a look at the singers that were taught by teachers. Now, when I look at this list, am I surprised? Definitely not. In fact, it is rather encouraging. The list is full of singers that learned to sing at an early age with a teacher. Some taught themselves how to sing initially, and then they would later engage in lessons because they were starting to pursue their professional careers. Some even had full-on classical training. Yes, we see you, Jason Derulo. Nowadays, it seems that most pop stars, particularly in the contemporary spaces, go for lessons to improve their vocal technique, the control of their voices. And they seem to engage in lessons when they're preparing for a recording of an album or a tour. Also, with many pop singers coming from backgrounds like the Mickey Mouse Club or certain sort of musical type of TV shows on networks like Nickelodeon, most of them would have experienced some sort of vocal coaching as preparation. So, it seems singing lessons were inevitable for most of the famous singers we know today. So there it is. I've tried to provide as much from both sides. I've attempted to see the good and the bad. But the question is, where do I stand on this one? You'll have to wait for the next episode to find out.